The first large part of this book is spent speaking about this feeling of inferiority. And what it says, as we'll look at some of these quotes from it, some of my favorite quotes from the book, as we'll see there, a healthy feeling of inferiority is something that everybody has, right? We all have this feeling of inferiority, and when used properly, it's actually a benefit to us. It exists within us like most feelings, like most emotions. It exists within us to serve a purpose. The problem comes when we don't recognize that that's what it's there for. The same as anxiety, we speak about this often, right? Anxiety can be used for good. It can direct us and alert us to things that need to be changed or to things that we haven't faced yet, right? The problem becomes when we allow that anxiety or any of the other emotions that come up to dictate our actions without recognizing what are they actually there to, how are they there to serve us, right? What are they actually trying to say to us? And so this feeling of inferiority, which most of us probably struggle with at one point or another, perhaps even presently, is something that is so widespread in the world, especially today with social media and everybody kind of trying to keep up with the Joneses and all our stuff being out on social and having to keep up appearances. And so it's this idea that rather than resist it, rather than try and numb it or escape from it, if we lean into this feeling of inferiority and learn how to apply it properly, then it can be a trigger for some intense healing and growth. And so let's look at how to begin that process and what Alfred Adler indirectly is saying through this book. So the first quote that I want to read you is probably what a lot of people are feeling. So the way that this book is structured, it's a conversation between a philosopher and a youth, and the youth is coming to the philosopher, which is essentially a stand-in for Alfred Adler, the psychotherapist. And the youth is disagreeing with all of Alfred Adler's ideas and feels like they're not good ideas. And so the whole book is framed in this discussion between the philosopher and the youth, where the youth is constantly picking at the ideas that Adler presented, and the philosopher is trying to explain to him, how to view these ideas and how to implement them in his life, right? So that's the setup. And so the philosopher says, right now you are unable to feel happy. This is because you have not learned to love yourself. And to try to love yourself, you are wishing to be reborn as a different person. The youth says, yes, I guess that's right. Let's face it, I hate myself. And the philosopher replies, that's all right. If you were to ask around for people who say they like themselves, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who'd puff up their chest with pride and say, yes, I like myself. And so if you feel like that, I'd love to hear which of these two you resonate with you. Do you feel like you dislike yourself more often than not, or are you one of these few people that actually can confidently say, I do like myself? And so he goes on to say, the important thing is not what one is born with, but what use one makes of that equipment. And so if you feel like you've always had this feeling of I don't like myself, the important thing isn't that it's there, right? It's that what do we do with that feeling now? How do we talk to ourselves inside our mind about that idea, right? How do we look at it? Is it here to keep me down and to keep me holed up in my house and to keep me feeling bad about myself? Or is there a bigger reason why that feeling exists? And is there a way for me to look at it and use it in a way that's going to progress me forward? And spoiler alert, of course, it's the latter. And so we get into this feeling of inferiority, right? And so the youth says, the feeling of inferiority is a kind of launch pad. And the philosopher replies, that's right. One tries to get rid of one's feelings of inferiority and keep moving forward. One's never satisfied with one's present situation. Even if it's just a single step, one wants to make progress. One wants to be happier. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the state of this kind of feeling of inferiority. There are, however, people who lose the courage to take a single step forward and who cannot accept the fact that the situation can be changed. And so this goes back to something we talk about often on the stream that I mentioned at the beginning. This idea that all our quote unquote negative emotions have a way of helping us if we only recognize how they're there to serve us, right? And so when we think of feelings of anxiety, we talk about this when we talk about the book Who You Were Meant to Be by Dr. Lindsay Gibson, who wrote Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. In the book, Who You Are Meant to Be, she talks often about this idea that when we feel that anxiety, when we feel this high level of stress, what is really happening is not that, there's something wrong with us or that we're supposed to kind of numb or escape from those feelings or even distract ourselves from those feelings. What those feelings are there for, it's our intuition, our higher self, our still small voice, as she calls it, is telling us that there is something going on in our life that we are internally, deeply unhappy with. And it's trying to give us a signal, hey, I need you to look at this and I need you to deal with it. Not in a way that would manifest greater anxiety, but in the exact opposite. Let's look at this thing that's bringing up the anxiety. Let's sit with it. Let's reflect on it. Let's understand what it's there to tell us, what its message is. And once we have that awareness, we can start to begin to make a plan of what I'm going to do about it. And she talks in that book about how it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you find the root of the anxiety, for example, I hate my job or I chose the wrong career, whatever it is, right? The point isn't to kind of go scorched earth with it and to just immediately quit your job, immediately go all in on that side hustle. You can do that if you have the means, but the reality for most people is that's not a realistic step. And so people will not face the anxiety because they feel, well, I can't do that. I can't leave my job. I have responsibilities. And so let me not look at it because I know I can't do anything about it. And what Dr. Gibson talks about in her book and what is talked about in this book is that those beginnings can happen slowly, right? The first point is just to have recognition. Even if we take if we make no steps to change it at first, that's okay. The first part is awareness. As Don Miguel Ruiz says in The Four Agreements, the first step is awareness, because without awareness, there's nothing you can change. And so coming into the moment and recognizing this is here to serve me in some way, I just can't see how yet. And then being okay with those kind of uncomfortable emotions and being able to sit with them and reflect on their meaning and what they're there to tell us allows us to kind of open up this space to our true self, to our higher self, and have their voice heard so that we can start to take even just little steps toward that, right? So if I decide I don't like my job, to continue that example, it doesn't mean I have to go quit tomorrow, but it does mean that I can start to think of, what would it look like 5 years from now if I was doing something I was really passionate about? How can I take a step today and tomorrow and next month and next year to start to lead me in that direction? Because as Edith Eger says in the book, The Choice, right? She was thinking about, going back to school to do her master's. And she said, but by the time I'm done, I'll be 50. And one of her mentors said to her, honey, you're going to be 50 anyways. And so that's an idea that has stuck in my head and that we can apply in a whole host of different situations. This feeling of like, it's going to take me so long. Yeah, but that time is going to pass regardless. And so why not take these baby steps now? Why not reduce the pressure that we put on ourselves to have everything perfectly the way we want right this second, and instead to lean into that anxiety, to the feelings of inferiority, to ask what the message is there, and then to take it day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, starting to do the work of progressing towards whatever message our higher self is sending us, right? And so again, as he explains in this passage, right, a healthy feeling of inferiority is something we all need, right? And that it exists in all of us. The key for us is to figure out how to use it and to make sure it doesn't turn into this kind of complex of keeping us from doing the things that we know we should be doing or keep us from moving forward, right? A healthy feeling of inferiority is good. He says here, no one is capable of putting up with having feelings of inferiority for a long period of time. Feelings of inferiority are something that everyone has, but staying in that condition is too heavy to endure forever. And so what he's talking about here is the inferiority complex, right? We can have healthy levels of inferiority that drive us forward, like we just spoke about. But when we get stuck in that state, in this inferiority complex of emotions that are keeping us from moving forward and keeping us from pursuing the life we want, that's when it becomes a problem. And that's probably the version that most people are dealing with, not necessarily because those feelings are so big, but because we haven't been taught how to sit with those feelings and how to listen to what their message is and how to start taking actionable steps toward alleviating those steps. We simply feel I'm not good enough, and it's so uncomfortable that we go back to over scrolling or overeating or over drinking or over smoking, right? Whatever it is, all we're trying to do is escape those feelings rather than instead, as we just spoke about, to sit with it and to reflect on what is the message here and how can I do something about it. And so the next time you're feeling kind of that inferiority feeling, ask yourself, right, is this the healthy kind or is this the complex kind? And if it's the complex, what do I have to do to turn it into the healthy kind? Meaning the kind that's going to drive me towards progress, right? If I'm feeling inferior, that makes sense because there's probably a ton of people who are better at whatever the thing I'm doing at. And so that's okay, because let me use that to drive me forward, to inspire and motivate me to look at the people who have achieved the things that I want to achieve and recognize they didn't do it overnight either. And if they can do it, then I can do it, right? And then reflecting on what did they do, right? How did they get to the place they're at, right? Those are the ways we use our feelings of inferiority in the healthy, productive manner, as opposed to the complex kind, which keep us from taking all those same actions. He says here, first, there are two objectives for behavior: to be self-reliant and to live in harmony with society. This is echoes a lot of what the Stoics talk about, right? That their goal, according to the ancient Stoics, the goal is first to fix yourself up, whatever that means for you, to go internally, to figure out what you think about, how you think about it. What does the voice inside your head sound like? How do we optimize that to lead us towards healing and growth? And then to take that energy and to kind of emanate that outward into the world in order to help the people in our lives, our loved ones, and our society at large. So this is echoing some of that here, 2,000 years after the Stoics discovered it or discussed it. So he says again, first, there are two objectives for behavior: to be self-reliant and to live in harmony with society. Then the objectives for the psychology that supports these behaviors are the consciousness that I have the ability and the consciousness that people are my comrades. And these are two things we've probably gone away from a lot, right? The second more than the first. This idea of I have the ability, or as I like to phrase it, I can handle this. It's one of the two key ideas that I play inside my head over and over again. One being I can handle this, and two, this too shall pass, right? So in all moments of difficulties, reminding yourself you have the ability to persevere just as you've persevered through everything else that's happened in your life. You're going to do it through this, whatever's happening right now. And two, this recognition that whatever my stresses are, whatever my situation is, just as everything else has passed before, this will pass too. So how can I optimize my journey through this until I get to the other side? And kind of the other part of that is that people are my comrades. And especially in today's world where the division has been kind of monetized by media and the social platforms that are pitting us one against the other, especially in the realms of religion and government and all those types of things, right? We've kind of internalized this idea that at least half the people are my enemies, instead of recognizing that I and they came from the same thing, whatever you believe that thing is, whatever the source of life is, right? We both came from that, right? And that person is my brother or my sister, in that we are the same, right? In this giant galaxy and infinite space of everything being different, everyone on this planet is ultimately the same. And so starting to see everyone, right, regardless of what their beliefs are, regardless of what their opinions are, that we are comrades, we are brothers and sisters in arms, and we are all essentially the same, right? Our DNA is like, I don't know what the actual percentage is, but like 99.99% the same between each person. And so ultimately we can have different opinions, but we have to recognize that we came from the same source, and we're going to return to that same source, whatever you believe that to be, whether it's dust or atoms or awe or God or universal energy. It doesn't matter. The reality is we all came from that thing, whatever it is, and we're all going to go back to that thing, whatever it is. And so this recognition that essentially I can handle this, or I have the ability to overcome, and that people are my comrades. See the question, do you know what the broken circle means or what it is called? I do not. It seems like just kind of like the circle of life, a Zen. I would assume it's a Zen imagery, but I don't know specifically. And so Adler, in this book, discusses a lot about Adler's idea that all problems are interpersonal problems, meaning everything that happens to us in life, everything that we go through is connected to our relationships with other people in one way or another. And that this kind of like internal segregated experience that our mind kind of convinces us we're going through is in reality only a reaction to interpersonal relationships. And so Adler has 3 categories of these relationships. He refers to them as tasks of work, tasks of friendships, and task of love. And so our 3 relationships, right? Our work relationship, our friendship relationship, and our intimate relationship or relationships of love. And that anytime we're going through a struggle, we got to look at which one of these is in play right here, and then framing our mindset towards this idea again that people are my comrades. And so in those struggles, in those experiences, coming back to how do I make this interpersonal relationship part of this problem? How do I optimize that part? How do I fix that part? How do I heal that part, right? And recognizing, is this a work thing, a friendship thing, or a love thing? And that's going to play. That's going to be important as we get through this book. And I love this line. Kind of stands out on its own, but I love this line here. If you are not living your life for yourself, then who is going to live it for you? Right? And this is when we're dealing with inauthenticity, when we feel like we have to be like everybody else, when we're trying to keep up with the Joneses, when we're feeling too scared or self-conscious to be our true self and are constantly masking or trying to be like somebody that we're not. These things we talk about often, especially when looking at the book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. These things often come from our indoctrination during childhood, right? When our parents forced us to focus only on what they want, only on what their needs, only on the way that they wanted us to be. And so we've kind of internalized this idea of ignoring our true self and acting for other people. Right? And so this idea of if you are not living your life for yourself, then who is going to live it for you? This idea that we only have this one life. And if I'm too scared to be myself, then that self is essentially wasted away, right? Never to return. We're each, as common as we are, like we just spoke about, we're also each as individualistic as possible, right? Nobody else has my experiences, my thoughts. Nobody else has looked through my eyes. And so robbing the world of that perspective by trying to be like other people. Why do we need more people like other people? We already have those people, right? We need the new people, the people that are going to add their own value, their own perspectives, their own insights that nobody else on the planet could possibly have because they haven't gone through the experiences that we have. And so the idea of this book, one of the core teachings of it, is that we have to lean into that. And the way we do that is that we stop worrying what other people think of us, right? We have this courage to be disliked. We say to ourselves, I'm going to be my authentic self. And if that's a problem for other people, and of course, and he notes in this book, that doesn't mean you can be hurtful or harmful to other people. That's not what this message is saying. We kind of cut that part out of this. But beyond that, as long as I'm not hurting anybody, then I need to have this courage that if I'm my authentic self and other people don't like it, that's okay. It's not important, right? As the Four Agreements talks about, that's coming from their perspective, which we don't have access to their perspective. We don't know how they were raised in childhood, what experiences they went through, and then what led to that perspective of not liking the version of you that you are, right? It could have, it has nothing to do with us, generally speaking, it's coming through their own experiences, right? So maybe you remind them of, how someone that was abusive to them was in their earlier life, or maybe something like the opposite, where you're reflecting to them some way that they can't be, right? If you're completely authentic and if you're completely unworried about what other people think, and I'm someone who's extremely self-conscious and just constantly battles with this feeling of I can't put myself out there because other people are going to judge me, then when I see you being your authentic self, right, it fills me with this kind of anger that I project outwards, when in reality, if I could go into my consciousness and observe it, from almost an external perspective, I would recognize that what I'm really angry about, right, what I really quote unquote hate about you is the fact that you're able to do something that I cannot. And my true self, my higher self is screaming at me to be more like you, but I can't handle it because I don't know how to deal with those feelings of not being good enough or of being judged like I was in childhood. And so I can't be like that. And so instead of hating myself, I project that outward toward you. And so then we get to this third idea, which is the second idea, the separation of tasks. This is one of the key ideas from Adler and from this book. And it's this concept that in every moment we have to ask ourselves, whose task is this, right? I'll read a bit and then we'll talk about it. Right. So he says, when one is confronted with the task of studying, for instance, in Adlerian psychology, we consider it from the perspective of whose task is this. And he's talking about when, for example, when your child should be studying and they don't want to be, right? And so the discussion is about, should we as parents force them to study, or is that their task, right? And so he says, we need to think with the perspective of whose task is this, and continually separate one's own tasks from other people's tasks. Carrying out the separation of tasks is enough to change one's interpersonal relationships dramatically. And so when we think of the example of somebody not liking us, right, you find out that someone who maybe even you thought was a friend or, similar social circles, and you come to find that they actually don't like you, right? A friend tells you that they told them, oh, that guy or that girl is a jerk or not very nice or not funny or talks too much or whatever it is, right? And immediately we have this sense of kind of getting triggered by our past, of these feelings of inferiority, of not being good enough, of not being likable, right? And this book and a number of other books we read here talk about the idea that that's a separation of tasks. We have to ask ourselves, whose job is it to decide if they like me or not? Is it my job to make sure that everybody likes me? Or is that somebody else's job that has nothing to do with me, right? Of course, we go back again and note that when we're being harmful, hurtful to other people, that kind of, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about being someone who is not causing any harm. Once we've alleviated that point, right? Once we're making sure we're not hurting anybody, that's where this discussion picks up. Beyond that, beyond me hurting someone, beyond me making someone feel bad about themselves, once I make sure I'm not doing that, then everything that's left about their opinion of me is not my task. And that's really alleviates a lot of stress, because if it is my task, then I have a billion or whatever the population is right now, I have billions of tasks, and it's literally impossible for me to make sure that I am exactly what everybody else likes, right? That would not be possible. And so the only way to get rid of it is to eliminate all consideration of every person's perspective, to recognize that's their upbringing, that's their perspective, that's their experience that's leading them to make a judgment on me. And that cannot possibly be my task, because if it's my task with one person, then it should be my task with the billions of other people that live in the world. And that clearly can't be. And so if it's none, then it's none, right? If it's not one, then it's none. And so he goes on to say, there's a simple way to tell whose task it is. Think who ultimately is going to receive the end result brought about by the choice that is made, right? And this goes back to the parenting part, right? If it's the child who is going to get the benefit of studying, then that task is theirs, right? And we can debate, and we have debated this idea of, isn't it a parent's role to kind of drive certain behavior that we think is going to be beneficial for the child long term. And, you might have strong feelings one way or the other. This is Adler. He's just one psychologist who lived, a couple hundred years ago, or 100 and some years ago. And so if you don't resonate with that idea, if you feel like it is a parent's task to kind of drive that child forward towards growth, then that's fine, right? Then don't apply to that situation, but think about, let's say, in a perspective of somebody at work doesn't like me, right? Is it my task or is it their task? And so he says, in other words, it is not for your own good, but for the parents. And it is because the child senses this deception that he rebels, right? So this is the discussion of, do I force my child to study? And what the philosopher is saying, when we do that, it's really because we want our child to be doing well, right? We want the validation of the good grades. We want the teachers telling us that they're doing a good job. We don't want the judgment of other people if our child falls behind, right? And so all these things are things that we want as parents. It has nothing to do with the child, and children in their infinite wisdom and intuition can sense that, and that creates a divide, right? You're forcing me to do this because you're getting some benefit from it, right? And we see this all the time when parents force children to do activities that are really not in their wheelhouse, right? So you might be a really artistic child, but your parent has this idea about playing the piano. They really want you to play the piano. So they're forcing you to tasks that are not of interest to you, that are not, to your capabilities, and are ignoring your own needs, your own desires, right? And so what the philosopher and Adler directly are saying here is that those things are to make the parents feel good rather than to help the child, and that the child can sense that. I like this here. If you are leading a life of worry and suffering, which stems from interpersonal relationships, first learn the boundary from here on, that is not my task, and discard other people's tasks. That is the first step toward lightening the load and making life simpler. And so that's a good, easy place to start. So the next time somebody, doesn't like you, or the next time somebody's rude, or whatever the situation is, asking yourself, is this my task to worry about this, or is it their task? Now, if it's because I was rude to them, because I was really moody and unhelpful and, whatever, then it is my task, right? Because it's coming from my way of being. If, however, I am just existing in the world, being as, kind and helpful and whatever as I feel is right to do, and they don't like me for whatever reason, then I have to ask myself, is this my task or their task? And if I don't feel I need to change in that situation, if I've honestly self-reflected, I've looked at the situation and I think, no, I have no problem with how I behaved, with how I acted. It was, with good intentions and with kindness and with empathy. And if that still wasn't enough, then that's not my task. If I don't feel I need to change anything about the situation, then the way other people perceive that situation is their task. I cannot possibly attune myself to what every single person on the planet is feeling and kind of change my behavior to give them what they need. That's just not physically possible. And so this idea of, is it my task or is it their task? This is one of my favorite one of my favorite pages of this book. He says, all you can do with regard to your own life is choose the best path that you believe in. What kind of judgment do other people pass on that choice? That is the task of other people and is not a matter you can do anything about. And so an easy example of this is parents, again, who drive their kids to take up certain professions, right? You should be a doctor, you should be a lawyer, you should be an engineer. Definitely don't be an artist. Definitely don't be a musician or an actor or a writer, whatever it is, right? Take the safe and secure job, go do the thing that I believe is best, right? And so the question is, in those situations, how do we look at that? Do we just bend to their whims and wishes, as so many people do, right? Do we just trust that they know best about what kind of life should we lead, or do we recognize that that is their task? Their opinions are their task. My tasks are to lean into who I actually am, to first do the work of discovering that, of who am I, what do I want, what lights me up, what inspires me, what motivates me, and then to follow that path, because ultimately, right, especially in the case of parents, my parents are likely going to be gone before me, and I'm going to have to exist in the world without those opinions, without those beliefs, without those ideas. And when that happens, right, if I had only lived for them, then what happens now? Then who am I then? And so instead, right, the core idea of this book is to lean into to who we actually are, to reflect on that and start to take the steps that will lead us towards a life that excites us, that we wake up in the morning feeling motivated and inspired to act, as opposed to just feeling like, this is another day I have to grind through, I have to just get through just to get back into bed at the end of the day, right? That's the feeling and emotion that generally comes up when we live our life for other people, is that we go through the steps, but there's no energy, there's no excitement behind it, and so we're just kind of stuck on this hamster wheel of getting out of bed, doing things other people want, and then getting back into bed, thankful that the day's over. Is that the kind of life we want to live, right? When we're on our deathbed, whatever age that is, are we going to be, or how are we going to feel about the fact that we did that? And if you read any books there's some great books, I can't remember the titles, a couple I'm thinking of, where the author speaks to people who are kind of at end of life stages, hospice nurses and the like. And that they say consistently over and over that the number one regret is that they didn't live the life that they should have, or that they knew deep down that they wanted to live, right? That they lived for other people, or that they worried too much about other people's opinions of their behaviors, right? And if we know this factually, that this is the biggest regret that people have, it seems wise, right? Plus EV, a positive expectation for us to take actions to ensure we don't get there, right? If I know the worst case scenario is being on my deathbed feeling that way, then it makes sense that I should take the steps to avoid that reality, right? And so how do I do that? Right, I let go of the things that are other people's tasks, namely their opinions of me and how I should live my life. Thank you so much. Thank you for the gift. Good to see you again, my friend. So he says, you are worried about other people looking at you. You are worried about being judged by other people. That is why you are constantly craving recognition from others. What other people think when they see your face, that is the task of other people and is not something you have any control over. And I really like this line. It made me laugh when I read it. What other people think when they see your face, right? And we could use that, he's meaning it more philosophically, but I think, especially in the age of social media, we could take that, at its word as well, as far as like just looking at me, right? The self-consciousness that comes from what I look like. Am I fit enough? Am I skinny enough? Are my muscles big enough? Am I tall enough? Is my hair nice enough? Right? All these things, right? Those opinions, right? Because they're so varied, those opinions we have to recognize are other people's tasks, and they're none of my concern. Especially when we get deeper into the work and recognizing, like, how important is that for me when I look at other people, or when I interact with other people? Do I care whether they're skinny or not? Does that impact my interactions with them, right? Is it something that I consider when I'm trying to build a close relationship with someone? And the obvious answer is no, for the majority of us. If your answer is yes, then that generally means, for me, in my opinion, that there's some work to do internally about your own self-love that's being projected outward. But for most of us, when we think about that idea, right, when I meet a new person, I'm trying to decide whether there's someone I'd like to have in my life more often, that I'd like to build some sort of relationship with. Am I worrying about those small details in that way? And we're not talking about romantic relationship, because there's a different element of attraction there, but I just mean generally speaking, when you meet someone at work, are you more concerned about, what kind of person they are, what their personality is like, or what they look like, right? Obviously, the former. And so, we have to recognize that that's the same coming, from them to us. And that if they are, in fact, judging our appearance, if they are worrying about that zit or, the acne or my hair or my weight or my clothes, then that's a them thing, right? That's based on something that's going on inside them and is not relevant to my human experience, right? Look here. Oh, I love this passage. He says, so this is back to the idea of living a life based on what other people want, right? Or other people's opinions. He says, a stone is powerless. Once it has begun to roll downhill, it would continue to roll until released from the natural laws of gravity and inertia. But we are not stones. We are beings who are capable of resisting inclination. We can stop our tumbling selves and climb uphill. The desire for recognition is probably a natural desire. So are you going to keep rolling downhill in order to receive recognition from others? Are you going to wear yourself down like a rolling stone until everything is smoothed away? When all that is left is a little round ball, what would that be the real I? It cannot be. And I love this imagery of when we worry about other people's opinions, it is like we are a stone rolling downhill and thinking like the top of the hill is like where we plant our flag of our true self, of our best life. And any kind of rolling downhill that we do is moving towards, other people's opinions, what other people's wants, right? The valley of despair, if you will. And that the more we allow ourselves to roll down that hill, just like a stone, right, the more smoothed away we become, meaning we become just this cookie cutter version of ourselves that might not upset other people, but really has nothing that stands out. It has no unique characteristics. It is nothing but just a weathered away version of ourselves. And so I love imagery that I can keep in my mind in moments when I'm kind of doing this sort of behavior. And so ever since I've read that often comes up in my mind when I'm trying to be something that maybe I don't feel like I am, or I'm trying to act in a way that other people will like me or that will appease them. I have this image of like, are you a stone that's going to weather yourself away, to grind yourself away into nothingness, where at the end of your life, back on the deathbed, you're just going to be kind of a faceless stone that did really nothing that stood out. Is that what the goal is? Right? Because we take on the behavior as if that was the goal, to upset as few people as possible, to stand out as little as possible, right? To not make any waves. But when we get to the end of life as the smooth stone with no personality and no impact, are we going to be happy? Is that a successful life? Is that what the goal is? As he says here so well in just 3 words, it cannot be. That cannot be the real I. That cannot be the purpose of me being here. A trillion, I don't remember, Gary Vee always gives the stats. The odds of us being here as humans are something like 40 trillion to 1. We're on a rock flying through space. At this point of civilization. Is the point of all that, did all that happen just so I can be small and hide away and not make any waves until I pass away? Could that possibly be the point of this life? It cannot be. How could it be? Right? What would be the purpose of that? Then we might as well just have we might just as well be lemmings, right? Just following the leader off the cliff. Is that really what we want from our life? Right? And so this viewpoint from the end of life of imagining yourself on your deathbed and thinking, am I going to be happy? I chose this action. I chose this perspective. I allowed things to be as they are right now. Will I be okay with that? And if the answer is no, then that's a real good reason to start to optimize our thoughts, beliefs, actions away from that reality, right? And so now we get kind of to the third big idea of this book, where the title comes from, the courage to be disliked, right? So he says, in short, freedom is being disliked by other people. It is proof that you are exercising your freedom and living in freedom, and a sign that you are living in accordance with your own principles. It is certainly distressful to be disliked. By conducting oneself in such a way as to not be disliked by anyone is an extremely unfree way of living, and is also impossible. There is a cost incurred when one wants to exercise one's freedom, and the cost of freedom in interpersonal relationships is that one is disliked by other people. Again, and we'll see it here. I'll just read it now. I'm not telling you, down here, I'm not telling you to go so far as to live in such a way that you will be disliked. I'm not saying engage in wrongdoing. Please do not misunderstand that, right? And so that's the core point of the book, because it's kind of like the big contention is like, well, this is what sociopaths say, is I don't care what anybody else thinks, right? I'm just going to be me. That's great if it's not leading to harm, if it's not hurting other people, right? If it's not putting people in uncomfortable situations or making them feel bad about themselves, right? So we take that as context for this entire book. And so he says, but once we've made sure that that's not the case, the cost of freedom is, let's say, the possibility that one will be disliked by other people, right? If I'm being myself and someone does, if I'm, let's say, I'm a very talkative person and I go to a party and I'm kind of the life of the party kind of person, not out of a trauma or need to be liked, but just because that's my authentic self. I like to chat and I like to talk to people, and I don't mind when people are paying attention to me. And there's an introvert there who has really battled all those same things and doesn't have the ability to act in that way. That person is likely going to dislike me. I'm going to trigger something in them that is going to present to them. It's going to force them to look at the way they are and the way they'd like to be, and the kind of gulf between those two things. So the likeliest scenario in that situation is, rather than that person being self-reflective in that way, they're just going to say, I don't like that person. They're too loud. They always need it to be everything about themselves, right? And so that has to be a possibility that I'm okay with, as long as I've done the work to make sure that the way I am is not infringing or hurting other people, right? That it's just the cost of admission is that being yourself, you're going to trigger a whole lot of people, generally for reasons that have nothing to do with you or the way you are. Unless one is unconcerned by other people's judgments, has no fear of being disliked by other people, and pays the cost that one might never be recognized, one will never be able to follow through in one's way of living. That is to say, one will not be able to be free. And I think that that's the other kind of core point here is it's not just about being disliked, but not being recognized, right? Doing art, for example, for the sake of the art itself and releasing this attachment, I think that has become so much worse in social media of everything needs to lead to something big. I need the recognition. I need other people to tell me my music or my art or my TikToks are great and all kinds of nice things about me, that, the muscles that I'm building at the gym are really looking good, whatever it is, right? We can come up with a million examples. The point being that when I'm living for that recognition, when I'm craving that recognition, that is just another side of the same coin, right? The one side being disliked and the other side being very, very liked. Both of those are meaning that I'm uncomfortable in some way in who I am, and I'm doing things or not doing things simply for other people's opinions, right? To kind of mold other people's opinions in a way that they'll like me. But instead, right, the goal is to not worry about being disliked, and also the other side of the coin, to not worry about getting that validation from other people. It will likely come on its own in its own time, but if I sit there and I try and write my book thinking about what everybody's going to think about it, what's going to happen is that I'm never going to write it, right? Because I'm always going to be able to find a perspective that somebody's not going to agree with, or that other people are not going to like. And so the two sides of the coin, I got to be okay being disliked, and I got to be okay doing things for their own merit because it feels good inside me to do it, and it doesn't matter how other people perceive it, right? Or the opposite as well, being an introvert and looked at as a weirdo. Yes, that's a good point, right? In that example I just gave of being the life of the party and the introvert doesn't like you because it reflects something in them, it's also the opposite, right? That if you're an introvert, it's just the way you're wired, right? And we want to do the work of making sure it's not a trauma response, but that's a whole other conversation. But if I'm just naturally an introvert, and at the party, this life of the party person is like, what's the problem? What's that guy's problem? What's that girl's problem? Just always sitting there not talking. But maybe that's my comfort. Maybe I just love to sit there and people watch and interact, on one-by-one basis. And so we have to be okay with that too. We have to be able to be the introvert and sit there and look at that life of the party and see their judgment in their eyes of like, what's this guy's deal, and be okay with that because we're comfortable. Like, this is just the way I am. I'm not doing it to hurt you, and it has really obviously nothing to do with you. This is just the way I am. So if you want to judge that, right, that's your poison, as the Four Agreements says, right? When people try and give you their poison, if you take it, it becomes your poison. But if you reject that poison, then it stays theirs, right? So that's a good point. The not being recognized part hits a soft spot. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, definitely a lot of the stuff that we do, especially in the creative field, and especially now this day and age with social media, we have this feeling like other people have to tell me it's good, or the algorithm has to tell me it's good based on views and likes, or it's not worthy. And if you read the book, The Creative Act by Rick Rubin, the music producer, he talks, or watch some of his podcasts or whatever, he talks endlessly about this, that when you're creating art, you absolutely cannot have the audience in mind, which is very different than what a lot of people will teach you, influencers that are, trying to help people be creative. They'll say, create something that other people will like, right? Think about the audience first. And maybe there's a place and time for that. But if you listen to people like Rick Rubin, who have had a lot of success working with big artists, he has a completely opposite opinion, which is you should never, ever, ever bring the audience into your creative process. It cheapens the creative process. It means you're not being authentic to yourself. It means it's not even really your art. It's just your perception of what other people's art, of what the kind of art that they like is. And that leads to feelings of inadequacy, feelings of inauthenticity. And when it doesn't work, there's also a feeling of shame and guilt because I did this thing that wasn't even me, and people didn't like it. And so now it's kind of like this double thing. I wasn't myself and they didn't like it, and now I feel guilty or shameful about that. Started to do that, just creating for myself. Beautiful. That's the way we should do it. The creative mind, yes. I'm only like halfway through, but I'm really enjoying it so far. I don't remember the Morty. I don't know if I've watched the final episode. All right. And maybe we'll end on this for today. The courage to be happy also includes the courage to be disliked. When you have gained that courage, your interpersonal relationships will all at once change into things of lightness. Yeah, imagine if you could be completely 100% authentically yourself and at the same time be comfortable if people do not like that self. Why would you have interpersonal problems anymore? Right? You'd either be with people who like you for who you are, and that would feel great, or you'd be with people who don't like you for who you are, but you've already recognized that's a them thing, again, as long as I'm not hurting anybody, that's a them issue, likely coming from their own upbringing, their own experiences, their own perspectives. It has nothing to do with me and this belief that I can't please everyone all the time, so I might as well, please the people who like me for my authentic self, right? Indirectly pleasing them by just leaning into that person. And so it's kind of like the opposite of damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's, however we want to phrase the opposite of that is like, well, whether they like me or not, if I'm myself and I don't worry about being disliked, if I have the courage to be disliked, then there's no problems in interpersonal relationships. If you don't like me, great, that's a you thing. Like, we don't have to hang out. I don't have to please everybody. You don't have to like me. There's no rule that says you have to like me. And if they do, how good does that feel? If they like you for who you actually authentically are, if we could flip a switch and no longer worry about people's opinions and only act from our interests and energy and excitement, and then we find people, which we will undoubtedly find lots of people, and what actually happens is that people become more attracted to people like that, unless they're really internally suffering from their own stuff and can't handle that kind of mirroring. But what generally happens is that we attract more people, and those people are attracted to us, to our real self. How good would that feel, right? And if think of like your best friend or a family member you're really close with that really knows you quite well and love you for you, like how good does that relationship feel, right? It feels amazing. And so this idea that all problems are interpersonal problems, according to Adler. And if I'm no longer worried about not being disliked, then all those problems go away. Because if you like me or you don't like me, I'm still myself and I'm okay with it. And so that's kind of the work of this book, is in figuring out how do I really lean into that philosophy? How do I really find this space where I'm so comfortable and content with who I am, and I've done the work of healing, I'm making sure that I'm not hurting anybody, and as long as I've done that, I'm so comfortable with what's left after that, that other people's opinions are none of my business and don't cause me to lose any sleep, good or bad, right? I don't get too high on my own supply. I don't think I'm like the greatest in the world. I'm not looking for that validation either. And I'm not worried about those people that don't like me, because there's always going to be people that don't like you. And so that's the work of this book. And the Rick Rubin book I mentioned, The Creative Act, right, is more of a practical philosophy of like, how do we lean into that person? How do we start being creative without the concern for the audience, regardless if that audience is, a massive audience like on TikTok, or even the audience of the people in my life. And so, that's the core messages of The Courage to be Disliked. I'll come back and do another stream at the end of the month. This is, by the way, our book of the month that we're reading in our book club right now. We're halfway through the book. If you want to join our book club, by the way, you could go to the link in the bio or the Academy of Self-Help, and you can join for a month for free. We're about to do, this is a great time to join because we're about to post our vote for next month's book of the month. So we offer 4 options every month, and then the community votes on which one we'd like to explore. And then we have weekly book club meetings every weekend, and we do these streams. So we're about to post that at some point this week, the next vote. So if you want to come and participate in that vote and decide on the next book that we're all going to read together and explore, you're welcome. Please come do that. Everything is in the link in the bio. And this is the book we'll be working on for the next couple of weeks. And then we'll be moving on. And some recent books that we did, well, this is a while back, Adult Children of Emotionally Mature Parents. We work with the author, Dr. Lindsay Gibson. We do a bunch of interviews with her. She comes into our community and hosts workshops, which are all recorded for members to check out after the fact. So if you join now, you still get access to all that. And then this is one of my favorite books that I've read, in ever, maybe. This was really, it felt read this book last month, and it really felt like the missing piece to a lot of the work that we've done with so many of these other books. This was, how do we go into ourselves, recognize all these, he calls it parts. I think of it personally as these, instead of having an inner child, we actually have many inner children that are trapped in kind of in the eras where the traumas or the things that happen kind of force them to be stuck in that time, right? It's figuring out how to do the work of going internally, kind of interacting with those different parts that are leading to all our kind of bad impulses, bad decisions, our self-hate, all the stuff that comes with the negative experiences that we had in our childhood, right? How do we go in there and reparent and kind of bring all those parts together, like as if you were a parent bringing like this collection of children together that you could care for them? Because right now, all these parts of us are in, usually self-destructive ways. In their own perspective, they're taking care of us, right? So they're making us feel not good enough because they're fearful of, this is just one example, they're fearful of being out in the world and being judged, because when I was young, I was really judged, and I didn't like that was very scary and painful. And so now my mind, or that part, is keeping me from interacting with new people, from trying new experiences, because all it remembers is that pain of judgment, and it does everything in its power to prevent that from happening again. Because at our core, until we do the work, we're just a self-protective mechanism. We remember something painful, and our mind says, I didn't like that, so we're not going to do that again. And it finds a whole host of ways of hiding, numbing, escaping from those things to avoid that pain. Even though that pain, we can learn strategies to deal with that. And so this is the book that kind of really opened up the door for how do we actually physically, specifically do the work of dealing with our hurt inner children in a way that will allow them to kind of let go of that pain and allow us to move beyond it, right? And to then move on to the next inner child and whatever thing they're holding on to. And as you do this work, which is kind of like a psychedelic process of like going in and literally having conversations with these different parts, that healing that comes from that process really feels like I said earlier, the missing link to all this stuff that we read about here. So highly, highly recommended. I could talk about it, all day long. One of my favorite books ever. So we went from that to this, right? So now we've done the healing in our parts, and now we're figuring out how to be our highest authentic self, regardless of what other people's opinions about that self is. That book is so heavy. Hey, Angie. Yeah, it was very, very heavy. And as the people in our community know, I love the heavy stuff. Only because, I've spent a couple of decades now doing the work of sitting with the difficulties that come up and being okay with the uncomfortable feelings. If you haven't done that work yet, then you might want to start kind of with easier books. You might want to start with The Untethered Soul or The Power of Now or Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, right? And to start figuring out, how do I sit with this discomfort? How do I recognize that it's there to send me a message, to serve a purpose, that it's everything inside me is trying to drive me toward my highest self and my best life. And once you've done that and you've collected some of these strategies of how to deal with the discomfort, that's where you pick up a book like No Bad Parts and kind of get into the real work that is able to set us free, ultimately, I think. Hey, Ashley. Any books from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross? No. Well, that name sounds familiar, but I don't remember. I don't know if I know her work. You're so welcome, Chicago. Yeah, I love the fact it actually makes me really, really happy. And my wife and I were joking, maybe it's like the greatest meta thing ever to write a book about being disliked and then to have a typo in the title. We don't, we think it's probably wasn't intentional, for a book that sold, I think, 3 million copies, that it was all done with a typo. And it's a book about, being okay, being yourself and being disliked is wonderful. If that wasn't intentional, then it's like a beautiful act of the universe kind of just really showcasing the message. And so I love that.